Hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm really glad you could be here. So, how do you really become a successful business leader, a really good business leader? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And this is something you need to know because, look, there's really a couple different ways you go. You either have an organization where you're not a good leader and your turnover is high and it's a nightmare. If you ever look at the cost of time, energy, and resources that is to replace somebody, it's substantially high. Or you get this nailed down, which very few do. And when you do this well, the people want to work for you, your troops rally around, and it's just so much easier to grow a successful business that you can really enjoy working in and scale that business. But how do you do it? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. And with us is Sam Palazzolo. Now, Sam is the founder, magazine, and managing director and tip of the spear ventures at a private equity firm that provides early stage entrepreneurs with venture capital, has a holding portfolio from mergers and acquisitions, and conducts business funding services as well. Now, during Sam's time at TIP, he and his team built the organization into one of venture capital's favorite firms, a sustainable leader and an innovator early adopter, dramatically increasing customer satisfaction and growing financial results for the companies they help grow. Now, his greatest achievement, however, may have been to make himself a better leader. He decided to work on his leadership skills relentlessly and grow the next generation of leaders. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same here, man. I really love your accomplishments and what you've done. So what about post-pandemic leading? How has it changed, do you think, since COVID when we look at how leaders lead?
Yeah, are we there yet? I think it could be the question we could ask first and foremost. We look at our leaders that we work with, and I also, full disclosure, I'm a faculty member at UNLV. I'm an adjunct faculty. I teach a leadership course there in an exec ed offering. It's based off of my 5th book that I wrote on leadership. I've done that since 2008. So we kind of get this leadership space, and it's kind of one of the things that we look at from a culture fit and alignment in our M&A practice going out. As well as I founded a 501c3 called the Javelin Institute that focuses on providing an executive education offering for leadership development and executive coaching for small business owners. So I think that your question's a pertinent one right now, and we wanted to know that too. And so we reached out to 150 of the leaders that we work with, ranging from the Fortune 500 all the way down to the SMB market. It was geographically neutral. In other words, it was full compass. While the majority of the 150 leaders we outreached and connected with were domestically here in the US, it really had some international flavor because we also have clientele that are down in Australia, they're in South America, Central America, as well as Europe. Here's what we found. This is where the nuts and bolts kind of boil down to. We can be really great leaders right now, but there's 2 things that our people are looking for us to accelerate or to be out in front of: the tip of the spear, the edge of the knife. They expect us to do what leaders should do, and that is to lead. And that is, first and foremost, there has to be really great clarity on strategy, Ty. The second thing is that it comes down to the execution. In other words, are we properly executing against that strategy? And more importantly, are we holding folks accountable? Everybody from senior leadership all the way down to entry-level associate, accountability is the #1 issue that we see regarding execution failure today. But that's what our 150 leaders that we outreached and polled, those were the top 2 I came back with.
So I'm interested from your perspective, from venture capital, you're looking to acquire businesses. And I think what I think I know is that the leadership and the person that's running that business might be one of the most important things that you're really looking at. So what are you looking for specifically when it comes to leaders in organizations that you possibly acquire?
Yeah, so we typically, and we're a unique firm. We look in those unsexy industries. I led a tech startup from 2010 to 2012. After the private equity acquisition and exit that I achieved, that's when I founded Tip of the Spear Ventures. We look in our M&A practice as in those unsexy areas. We don't look in tech. We look in manufacturing industry as well as in the construction industry. And typically Our model is one where we want to identify an organization that's led by a baby boomer looking to retire, because we think that we can carry on the legacy of that 20-plus-year-old organization better than anybody else out there. And so from a, what are the characteristics of the leader? We look for all kinds of different behavioral characteristics. It's kind of our secret sauce regarding the assessment that we put an organization through when we're identifying those due diligence moments. At the top of that list, though, are our character moments, right? Trust being first and foremost, as well as their vision and how it is that they executed. And fourth, really, how it is that their team rallied around that vision to help with the execution moment, because the team's going to be left behind, right? Hopefully the baby boomer goes off, sunsets, rides off into that magical sunset, we hope, and into retirement successfully, but the team's going to be left behind. And so how well is the team equipped to be able to continue on that legacy, on that journey from that baby boomer leadership once they exit?
What do you look at as effective ways to lead a business? Like when you look at a leader, what are some things where you look at and you're like, yeah, those are very effective ways to lead a business, and those are not effective ways?
Yeah. So I'm an accountant by training, and this is a great question because I don't have the personality that plays nice with other accountants or finance folks, if that makes sense. But it is one of those things where, from a finance and from an accounting perspective, obviously we look at the financials. The financials are crucial. If the numbers don't dictate us moving forward, I don't care how good of a story the organization has. Flip the coin. We also, within our venture side of the business, we still do early stage seed funding for organizations and entrepreneurs. Traditionally, we've drawn the line at $1 million annual revenue for those, but the leadership characteristics are the same for what it is that we look at. But it typically starts with the numbers. If the numbers don't dictate us getting involved or furthering the conversation, we're not going to do it. It brings up a good point also, a secondary moment, and that is that we are true believers in managing by the metrics. In other words, if the organization doesn't have key performance indicators or metrics, which why they're leading the organization forward and everybody else is on the same page, that spells out a couple of maybe red flag moments for us, or maybe some indications of, maybe there's an opportunity here. The financial statements all make sense to us, but they don't have any metrics in place, and they lead by not necessarily analyzing the numbers, but really by the subject matter expert, which typically is the small business owner, the leader of the organization. Sometimes those still make sense to us, but if the financial numbers don't make sense, we typically don't move on.
What are you seeing when it comes to leadership in this kind of, new world of virtual, where a lot of businesses now moved virtual, and it seems like an adjustment? I mean, we were already virtual, so it wasn't too big of a deal for us, but a lot of others aren't. So how are you seeing that affect leadership now?
Yeah, likewise. I mentioned the tech startup that I helped lead. It was essentially this Zoom type of a platform. Had I known Zoom was going to be Zoom, maybe we should have held it. Maybe we should have kept it. But it is one of those things. We were early adopters within the virtual space. We run a virtual organization. There is no tip of the spear building. I had one of our associates ask us in an interview a couple of years back, do you think we'll ever have a tip of the spear building? And I said, gosh, I hope not. Do we want to own a building, a couple commercial properties and whatnot? Yeah, sure. Maybe that's part of the portfolio strategy, but I certainly don't want to have an office building, if that makes sense, where it requires all of us to come in. We're looking from a global talent pool, not necessarily the geographic area of where it is that we're based out of in Las Vegas, Nevada. So it is one of those things, though, where even though we're early adopters, we've seen the struggle of what happened back in March of last year in 2020 from leaders who were attempting to, when nobody's coming into the office anymore, how am I going to get my information? And there are formal channels of communication, but there's also those highly valuable informal communication channels. Those would be the, hey, good morning moments when you walk into the office. Maybe it's within the elevator ride or standing over by the coffee pot, but it is one of those things where those informal communication channels, they pretty much dried up if they were a lake bed. And so the smart leaders, the good leaders, carve time out of their calendar to do just that. I'm not talking about the virtual happy hours either, Ty. Those were nice. Those were nice to have and maybe led to some really unique cultural adaptation. But I'm talking about just kind of the pull-ups, kind of the, hey, we'll make a phone call, or let's just, do you mind sticking around after the meeting for 5 minutes? I got something I want to run past you. Those were the moments where we saw leaders who truly accelerated in that work from home or the virtual environment succeed.
Well, what about the uncertainty? I mean, COVID has been shocking to a lot of entrepreneurs, right? So how do you think that good leaders prepare them, their organization, their troops for the kind of uncertainty that we've seen come out of COVID?
Yeah. So I'll go back to a good story from Tip of the Spear. So we have two sides of Tip of the Spear. We have a venture side of the house. I come from big consulting, Deloitte, Aon's Change Management Group. We still have a consultancy to this day. We had a meeting early on in the front part of the pandemic in March with Patrick Lencioni of the Table Group. And Patrick said something that stuck with us and really resonated with me. And that was, take your statements of work and throw them out the window. This is the opportunity for you to lean in. And where a lot of my peers who also run consulting firms or venture firms and activities, that they were falling flat, maybe contracts were frozen or canceled outright. We didn't lose a single client during the pandemic. And the reason for it was we threw our statements of work out the window, we leaned in, and we were looking to do whatever it is that we could to help out the organizations that we serve. We did about 150 virtual meetings like this. Some were more formalized into a structured, here's a topic that we want to review with everybody. But those were an indication of some of the meetings that we conducted. And the organizations that we worked with really, I think, got home sooner rather than later. But they overcame a lot of those initial, how do we work with our people who are remote? And it's from those types of coordination meetings, just ensuring that even though we're not coming back into the office, that everybody feels like we are back in the office to a degree, or more importantly, the best parts of being in the office were present in a virtual capacity.
What are you seeing, the leaders that you think are effective to what are the kind of things that they're doing to create high performing teams?
Yeah, and so right now, these high performing teams and the desire to have high performing teams, the rules are the same, but they've kind of changed a little bit, especially as we go to this virtual model. We're true believers. I think I mentioned earlier, from an accounting finance background perspective, and managing by the metrics or by the numbers, having key performance indicators, those KPIs on dashboards that get reviewed on a daily basis and on a weekly responsibility. Those dashboards from a review perspective lead to setting not only monthly goals and targets broken down into weekly, but really daily actionable coaching moments for the leaders. That 5 minute after the meeting, hey, would you mind sticking around? I got something I want to run past you, is a great example of one of the processes that we implemented in one of the organizations. That's one of the ways in which we see leaders today leading more effectively, whether they're virtual or if they were back in the office. We also know this much, though, and that is that it's awfully hard to express strategic direction, goal, all of those types of corporate initiatives if your associates can't find Clorox wipes or toilet paper at the store. And there's just this disconnect. It's the message can get delivered, but they're not at the level at which they can receive the message, primarily because they're not in position to receive not only that message, but any message. If you think of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're essentially looking for the basics. They're looking for food, shelter, those types of not necessarily creature comforts, but the things that are going to make their life better, and they need to take place. So it's one of those things where the best leaders that we also worked with during the pandemic had not only an empathic moment where it's like, I can walk for a minute and a mile in your shoes, but they also had that sympathetic moment where it's like, I'm walking in your shoes and your shoes are too tight. So let's get you new shoes. It's that type of a moment.
Do you see the skill sets changed with us moving to this, more digital world? virtual world, have you seen like the skill sets that of good leaders or what's needed there change?
I think that the skill sets are certainly ones that have to have some type of a digital exposure today. It's not good enough to be a really great leader if you can't hop on these types of Zoom sessions. You and I, before we hit the record button, we were making fun of folks who can't unmute themselves. And hey, isn't that part of the real world today in which we live in, where 25% of every meeting, according to the statistics that we see from Gartner, are spent either talking about you're on mute, you need to get yourself off mute. It's down in the lower left-hand corner, just hit the mute button. And unmute yourself. That's one aspect. I think the majority of the time it also comes from we don't see anything. What are you sharing? Can you please share? You said you were going to share. We're not seeing anything. That makes up 25%, I think, of every meeting, according to the folks at Gartner today. So some type of I want to say a skill set improvement to really take on this digital experience and to really master, this virtual communication channel that we find ourselves in. I know that there's this thing called Zoom fatigue also. Maybe it's from the lights that people have. Maybe it's from the constant ability. We have one leader who said, I hate those Zoom meetings. And I said, why do you hate them? You are brilliant on these Zoom meetings. And they said, I just hate the way that I look. I mean, do I have that type of a sourpuss in the meetings that we have face to face? And I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but in a fully transparent moment, yeah. I mean, and that's what people love about you, is that you wear things on your shirt sleeve or on your face. Everybody knows whether or not something resonates with you positively or negatively because of your facial expressions. And it took I think they described her beer face Betty within the organization, bitter beer face Betty, because it was one of those things. If you remember those beer commercials from a couple of years back, it was one of those things. The message either resonated or it was like, we need to move on to the next topic because we're not getting anywhere. So anyway,
like
those
that.
are a couple of items.
And there was some crazy statistic on that too, of how much time people spend looking at themselves, on the meetings, versus actually like looking at anybody else to see what's going on. So it's kind of funny that you say that. What about decision making? Anything we could do to become better decision makers as leaders?
I think that there was one moment that came out during the pandemic, and maybe there was some indication of it just prior to, but it really resonated with us, and we kind of drove it down culturally throughout the organization. And that is, in order to move fast, we're going to have to move slow. And by that, I mean, there's the need to kind of take things in and maybe to take a moment. This is something that is lost within a virtual atmosphere. We see it sometimes a lot more present in a face-to-face atmosphere, but it's the ability to just kind of have dead air. And there's almost this concept in a virtual capacity, and it probably comes from radio, right? That anytime there's dead air, that's to be avoided. But in a virtual communication channel, having that dead air, that downtime, that space in between, where somebody's actually reflecting on what it is that's being said, and more importantly, is thinking about the answer, and you should be able to see that. We saw that a lot more in the face-to-face world when we were in boardrooms and meeting rooms and having those types of conversations in the face-to-face workplace. We don't see a lot of that in the virtual. Again, I blame it on the dead air concept from radio, but those are the things. That's one example of what it is that we see leaders doing, the better leaders doing. They're almost enacting a dead air time. So some of the meetings that we participated in with some clients, they've actually not only put the agenda out there and they've gone through it, but then they also take a break mid-meeting. If some of the statistics are from a Zoom fatigue, depending on who it is that you listen to, that adult learners or adult participants at most should have either a 10-minute interval or a 20-minute interval. Well, that means that at some point, whether it's 10 minutes in or 20 minutes in, there's going to be a tune out. They're just fatigued. They're no longer present. They're not listening. And to continue on would kind of be to be driving into the ditch. So a lot of the organizations that we work with, we've started enacting these, either a break, go figure, a break where somebody can go stretch their legs, think about what was said, kind of bring some fresh thought based on what it is that we said, and kind of have a finish or a finalizing moment to the meetings without rushing to the conclusion of the meeting. So that might be something else to consider from a best practice, what folks are doing to help make the most out of these virtual meetings in this work from home capacity.
Yeah, and a lot of science about that too, about the fatigue and how fast that happens, like you said, after that 10, 15-minute interview, and the importance of breaks and micro breaks through the day and what that does for focus. What about biases? I read a lot recently about all the different biases we experience as humans, let alone leaders. Any way to kind of think of strategies to overcome biases and what we do to become better leaders?
I think so. I think that there's probably this cancel culture that's out there today, probably should have leaders be a little bit more cautious about what it is that they say and what their biases are, and not attempting to project those biases onto everyone else. This has also been a fascinating time from a human culture perspective, not only here in the States, but internationally. We're facing this medically induced pandemic and financial recession. It's unlike the 08, 09 financial recession that occurred primarily due to the financial markets. This one's medically induced. And so there's a pro, a con, there's a bias towards political affiliation, and that kind of is rearing its head, whether you think it's pretty or ugly, into the workplace. And let's face it, we always look at a couple of different things in organizations. What are the strategies that are in place, right? What are the processes that crop out from those strategies? So that's essential to the business. What are the technology that's in place that can help really expedite some of that strategic moment and the processes that they put in place? The third leg of the stool, so to speak, is probably the most important, and that's the people element. Well, we've made really great advances in virtual reality and artificial intelligence and robotics. We're at no point where we can go without having a person at some point in most organizations and most key skill positions. That people moment, let's face it, we're going to have them. And people are going to come with their own biases. I think the interesting thing about organizations is that, and I started off talking about the culture, we've got to make certain that it's a good culture fit. Most employees go into a workplace looking for exactly that. What's the culture here, and can I contribute to it? Sometimes there's a good fit, sometimes there's not a good fit at all. The folks who recognize I'm not a good fit, they generally move on, or they're asked to move on and go find a culture that's more appropriate for them. But these biases today, it's hard. And I'm not going to lie. It's almost like, if you remember when social media first started becoming a thing and people were posting online, and, there was the perception of, well, when you're posting that type of stuff online, you're actually a representative of the organization here. And so stop doing it. And it kind of fringes on the First Amendment, the ability for free speech. And it is one of those moments where it is we want our associates and certainly our leaders to be able to speak their mind, whether it's in the boardroom, a meeting room, or virtually across social media channels. But it's kind of one of those things where, as an associate, now more than ever, it's not just an individual, it's almost an affiliation with an organization. And most of the organizations that we work with, they're looking to stay above the fray. They want quality individuals who contribute to their culture, but it is one of those things where we don't want them not to be without their own personal biases. Sometimes those are great things to have, right? But it's an interesting topic. I'll be interested to see, really as a humanity, a moment, as a culture, as we continue to go through this pandemic and hopefully come out the other end successfully, where it is that those biases play for leaders and for organizations moving forward.
Yeah, it's very interesting. With what you do, a large part of venture capital is, if you acquire a business, or take ownership interest in a business, your goal is for it to grow, and something happen at the end, whether it be an exit or acquisition, IPO. So what have you found, can help? Because that's hard. Like I thought like getting the first 100 grand, everybody said was hard. And then I tried to scale. I'm like, wow, this is really difficult, because you scale and then you break everything and then you got to rebuild it and then fix it and then build it to scale more. And so what have you found are some strategies that work well with the leaders that you lead to be able to effectively grow the business and scale?
Yeah, we just had this conversation the other day, and you're right. The early stages of an organization and organizational growth in general, at certain revenue plateaus, you generally see a changing of a whole lot of things. There needs to be a change in mentality of the leaders. There needs to be a change, first and foremost, though, with the tech stack. Here's what I mean by that. We just did this the other day with a client organization because they were struggling with their growth. And one of the things that they were struggling most with was that they had about 70 different types of technology that were coming into play. 70 is a lot. I mean, we pull our hair out, and obviously I'm a good example of the hair pull out moment or club. But generally around 10 for us is where we start to look at things from a, gosh, why do we have so many things? And is there a next best alternative that's out there that might coordinate some of those efforts? And so we do a tech stack analysis with our clients, and especially with the organizations that we acquire, because we recognize that it's almost like no one tech offering plays nice with all other tech offerings. There's a certain push and a pull. Some play nicer with others, but very rarely do we find one that plays nicely with everything. But that doesn't mean that you can't combine or look for a tech offering that has a multifaceted, almost a Swiss Army knife, if you will, approach. And while that's kind of a double-edged sword, because if you could take the best of across each one of those technology offerings that organizations work with and Frankenstein it together, you'd have a really great tech stack. You'd have a really great tech offering or something that you were working on and with. But that's very rarely the case. So more times than not, you've got to take the good with the bad, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the good and the bad at quantity, if that's a nice way of putting it.
Well, what should we be doing to cultivate the next generation of great leaders?
Yeah, I think you mentioned off in the intro, and thank you for that nice intro, that I've been kind of a lifelong learner, and I was super fortunate. When I was with General Motors, after I left undergrad and grad school, we had some of the best leaders in the world that came through in our development program. When I was with Toyota Lexus, I participated in their high potential leadership development program as well, and got to learn the legendary Toyota quality management and Toyota financial management. Those things were ingrained in me at an early stage, primarily because I grew up living next door to a high school guidance counselor. And this was a high school guidance counselor who he had, I want to say it was the negative approach as opposed to a positive approach with me. I remember him basically telling me, Sam, there's a lot of folks that really do well working in a manufacturing complex on the assembly line. And there's really no shame in that. And I guess maybe that was well, I'll show him moment, or maybe I can do it and I'll prove to him wrong. I know that I ended up going all the way through undergrad and grad school before his son completed undergrad. I think his undergrad experience lasted 6 or 7 years. But I guess I've always had that type of a mentality. And when I work with leaders and we look at the leaders who are successful, like attracts like, right? And so we look for leaders who are in that perpetual, constant leaders leading and growing perpetually concept. We like those types of leaders best. And really in looking at the next generation leaders, what are we doing to help them out? It's really putting them through a similar pace. It's never been easier, right? I mean, in the old days, we either had to find a workshop, find a course, go physically to it. Today, I mean, it's amazing. On LinkedIn, they've got a whole docket of training programs that you can look at. Coursera is a wonderful type of an online collegiate course level type of an academic experience that you can participate in. if all else fails, I mean, the ability to become an expert today, I'm not certain that Malcolm Gladwell and his studies of 10,000 hours will come down to this, but I really think you're probably 5 pages deep on Google from exploring, identifying, and then becoming more of an expert. Maybe not a subject matter expert, but an expert on a topic. 5 pages deep, you can get there. And YouTube probably is a primary place to learn something.
This has been powerful. I appreciate you coming on today. You do a lot of things, and I know that your firm deals with private equity. You also do a lot of things on the advisory end to help in these kind of areas and beyond. So where can everybody go listening and watching to be able to learn more?
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, I'm sure. We put together a 37-page, 132 question. Think of it as a business transformation self-assessment workbook. It's your opportunity to draw a line in the sand, maybe identify a few key areas where you as an individual leader, as well as an organization, can do better. We'll make that workbook available in the show notes. It's our #1 go-to. If you want, though, visit Tip of the Spear Ventures. That we have a chat bot in the lower right-hand corner of the website. You'll see my picture. And good news, I'm the chat bot. So if you interact with the chat bot and I'm not in a meeting or on a plane, which we're getting back out there and doing more and more these days, fortunately, I'll interact with you live. We had a gentleman who typed something into the chat bot, put down his phone number. I called him up. This is the other thing. We talked a little bit about this virtual workplace. We find that people have this propensity to want to stay away from phones. They either want to text, they want to fire emails off. We've always been a phone forward and phone first type of a group, thanks to the sales coach that we work with, and he's been instrumental in changing our culture. I'll give him a shout out. His name's Anthony Iannarino. He's in Columbus, Ohio, the best in the business. And I've worked with several sales coaches over the years. I'm a true believer in coaching. I have 3 in rotation. Anthony has stood the test, though. So, if you go to tipofthespearventures.com, interact with the chat bot, you'll see me. Ask me, let me know how it is I can help. I'll help any way I can. And if I can't, I probably know somebody with my nearly 7,000 LinkedIn connections who can. And I generally know almost all of them, so I'll provide the introduction.
Sam, thanks for coming on with us today.
No, thank you. Always wonderful spending time with you.
All right. So everybody listen, if this is important, leadership is important. And the reality is outside of their advisory services, Sam does a lot with venture capital as well. So if you're interested in learning more, go to their website. The website is tipofthespearventures.com. There's so much information. Like their blog is fantastic. You could just get lost in this for hours because the quality of information there and content is so valuable. But there's so many other cool things here that will really help you understand how to become a better leader and be able to tap into them to get help on the advisory side. And if you're interested in potentially getting capital injected into your business, there's some things that they can help you with along that line as well. So make sure you visit tipofthespearventures.com. Also in show resources, I'm going to put a link specifically to the report that Sam mentioned. That'll be here as well. So you can go to creditsuite.com/podcast and actually find Sam's episode. And then right there, you'll see that in our show resources page. So make sure you visit tipofthespearventures.com to learn more. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.